The walls are 12 feet thick. Limestone, hand-cut, set without mortar in some sections. Fort Henry, overlooking the St. Lawrence River at Kingston, Ontario. Construction began in 1832. The British military commissioned it to defend against American invasion. By the time the fort was completed in 1836, the threat had already passed. The walls were never tested by artillery. They stand today, carrying loads they were never meant to carry. Tourists, not cannonballs. Yet the engineering specifications tell the story. Lieutenant Colonel Elias Walker Durnford designed Fort Henry as a defensive installation capable of withstanding sustained siege. The primary threat: American forces equipped with 24-pound siege guns. The walls needed to absorb direct hits, not deflect them. 12 feet of limestone at key defensive points. 8 feet minimum elsewhere. Foundation depth: 20 feet into bedrock in some sections. Modern analysis shows the walls were overbuilt by a factor of approximately 3. For the expected artillery of the 1830s, walls 4 feet thick would have sufficed. Durnford specified triple that thickness. The construction consumed 4 years. Workers quarried limestone from nearby formations. Each block weighed between 2 and 4 tons. Placement required block and tackle, wooden derricks, teams of oxen. The fort's perimeter included 4 diamond-shaped bastions, Vauban-style fortification adapted for North American terrain. The geometry eliminated blind spots. Every approach could be covered by overlapping fields of fire. But those fields of fire were never needed. The threat assessment driving the construction was rooted in the War of 1812. British forces had watched American artillery improve rapidly. By 1830, military planners in London feared a renewed conflict. The Great Lakes region was strategically vital. Control of the St. Lawrence River meant control of supply routes between Montreal and the Western Territories. Fort Henry was positioned to close that river to enemy vessels. Construction costs exceeded £70,000 sterling. The budget had been $40,000. And the overrun triggered parliamentary questions. Durnford provided technical justification. The walls were designed to survive not just initial bombardment, but sustained siege lasting months. The thickness wasn't excessive. It was calculated redundancy. The American invasion never came. Relations between Britain and the United States stabilized through the 1830s and 1840s. The Rush-Bagot Treaty limited naval armaments on the Great Lakes. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty resolved border disputes. By 1850, Fort Henry was a peacetime garrison housing administrative staff and training recruits. The walls, built to stop armies, instead stopped weather. Kingston winters subject limestone to freeze-thaw cycles. Water seeps into microcracks, freezes, expands. Standard masonry begins deteriorating after 30 to 40 cycles. Fort Henry has experienced over 190 freeze-thaw cycles since completion. The 12-foot thickness provides thermal mass that moderates temperature swings. The outer face weathers. The interior remains structurally sound. Modern surveys document this. Engineers conducted comprehensive structural assessments in 1975, 1995, and 2015. Wall settlement, 3 to 5 inches total over 180 years, concentrated in areas with clay substrate beneath the bedrock. Block displacement, minimal. Mortar degradation in exposed joints requires periodic repointing, but protected sections show negligible deterioration. See the dry stacked sections, where blocks were placed without mortar, perform differently than mortared masonry. The gaps allow slight movement during thermal expansion and contraction. The blocks shift, redistribute stress, return to equilibrium. This flexibility prevents the cracking that affects rigid mortared walls. Fort Henry was never attacked, but it was tested by time, which is a different kind of siege. The British garrison remained until 1870. Canadian forces assumed control after Confederation, and the fort transitioned from active defense to training facility. Cadets practiced artillery drills using the same gun ports designed for actual combat. The walls absorbed recoil from thousands of training rounds. 12-pound and 18-pound guns firing blanks. Not the 24-pound siege guns Durnford had planned for, but enough to stress the structure. No cracks developed. No settlement beyond initial compression of fill material beneath foundations. By 1900, Fort Henry was obsolete. Artillery had evolved. Rifled cannons firing explosive shells made masonry fortifications outdated. The thick walls that would have stopped solid-shot cannonballs couldn't resist high-explosive ordnance. Military doctrine shifted to mobile defense and concealed positions. Fixed fortifications became liabilities. The Canadian military decommissioned Fort Henry in 1891. It sat empty for decades. The walls weathered. Vegetation grew in mortar joints. Drainage systems clogged. Water infiltration caused localized damage. Surface spalling, biological growth, but no structural failure. Restoration began in 1936 as a public works project. Workers cleared debris, repointed mortar, restored drainage. The walls required maintenance, not rebuilding. The 12-foot thickness had provided enough redundancy that a century of neglect hadn't compromised load-bearing capacity. Fort Henry opened as a museum in 1938. It remains operational today. Tourists walk atop walls designed for artillery crews. But the structure supports loads it was never intended to carry. Thousands of visitors annually, museum installations, ceremonial events. The walls handle it without concern. A structural engineer reviewing Fort Henry's specifications in 2010 calculated the safety factors. The walls were designed to withstand hydraulic pressure from potential flooding, wind loads from lake effect storms, impact loads from artillery, and stress from foundation settlement. While for the actual loads experienced, primarily self-weight and minor visitor traffic, the safety factor exceeds 5 times stronger than necessary for current use. This wasn't incompetence. It was intentional overbuilding for a threat that planners knew, even at the time, was unlikely to materialize. Internal British military documents from 1830 to 1835 reveal the paradox. Intelligence reports suggested American invasion was improbable. Political relations were improving. Economic ties were strengthening. But military doctrine required defensive infrastructure regardless of threat probability. The walls weren't built because invasion was likely. They were built because it was possible. Durnford knew this. His correspondence with superiors in London acknowledges the low probability of attack, but his engineering calculations assumed maximum credible threat. Worst-case scenario planning. The walls were sized for siege conditions that British intelligence suggested wouldn't occur, and they didn't. The walls stand as monuments to caution. Yes, engineers who built for possibilities, not probabilities. Structures designed to survive threats that never came, now serving purposes never imagined. Modern maintenance costs are modest. Parks Canada spends approximately $200,000 annually on Fort Henry's upkeep. Most funding goes to cosmetic restoration and visitor infrastructure. The limestone walls require minimal intervention, repointing every 15 to 20 years, drainage maintenance, vegetation control. The masonry itself is stable. If Fort Henry were designed today, how the specifications would differ. Modern engineering standards optimize for actual loads, not theoretical maximum threats. The walls would be thinner, foundations shallower, materials lighter, construction faster and cheaper. But the lifespan might be shorter, the maintenance burden higher. The 12-foot walls weren't built to contemporary standards. They were built to survive what planners feared most, even when intelligence suggested those fears were overblown. That caution, the engineering conservatism, the redundant margins, the material abundance, ensured survival far beyond the fort's military relevance. The walls endure, not because they were tested by war, but because they were overbuilt for war. The invasion never came. The walls remain.